Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled Modernizing Healthcare Platform to Drive Digital Transformation. My name is Kishan Srinivas. I'm a Senior Director for Products at Innovacer. And with me, I have the privilege of having two industry experts who I also have the privilege of calling my colleagues. Mike Sutton, our Chief Technology Officer at Innovacer, and Kanav Hasija, our co-founder and the Chief Customer Officer at Innovacer. Mike, would you be kind enough to just give a quick introduction about yourself to our audience?
Hi, and thanks, Kishan. Yeah, hi, like Kishan says, my name is Mike Sutton. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Innovacer. Coming close to my first year here. I come here from a long legacy of data integration and data management at places like Kaiser Permanente, the Central Intelligence Agency. I work in the transportation business, hospitality business with the cruise lines, and then oil companies. But in all the capacities, building out the analytic and data environments of these modern enterprises. Thank you.
Kanav, can I get an introduction from you too?
Yeah, hi all. This is Kanav here. Innovacer is primarily the whole soul bread and butter of what I do, but analytics and data are my core expertise, and I've been navigating that maze in healthcare for the past 5 or 6 years now. And every day is a new learning, as healthcare is so big. But this evolution of data and analytical infrastructures and fabric in organizations and how it's changing over time is very interesting to me, and happy to be on this webinar to kind of present our thoughts and frameworks there.
Thank you, Kanav. So the plan for today is to really talk a lot more about why healthcare needs digital transformation, and also leverage both Mike and Kanav's expertise in this space of helping clients go through a digital transformation as a part of their day jobs, and see what we can pick up as action items or like referenceable items that we could apply into our respective organizations as well. When we talk about digital transformation, one of the key needs is largely because you want a solution or a platform that that allows health systems and providers to be flexible and to see how they can adapt with the changing needs. If you look at the last decade, you had tremendous changes in terms of how people are using technology within healthcare. Early part of the decade belonged to the electronic medical records. Meaningful use mandate drove a lot of that adoption. And we saw that a lot of provider organizations were going from having best of breed solutions to an integrated system of record to organize all of the information that they're capturing as a part of their care process. Now, once the digitization happened and we had enough data, we started seeing the wave of population health management on how providers could actively come together and manage the health side of the health risk of a patient. That's why we started seeing the wave 2, where providers started forming networks. There were mergers and acquisitions, and you suddenly had this scenario where one single health system or one single network has a bunch of different electronic medical records with information about the patient residing in them, but not all of them together. So the second wave brought in this whole idea of building data warehouses, getting data together, like being able to run analytics on top of that. But as we've evolved that, what we've realized is that in order for the long-term care to be really successful, everything has to move towards patient-centric care, whether it's in the ambulatory space or in the surgical space. There is a very strong need for care coordinators and care teams to be coordinated around the patient, have complete context about the patient that they're seeing at any given point of time, and make sure that they're able to use all the data points from different touch points of the patient when they are providing a specific diagnosis or a treatment or an advice to their patients. So this has been really this articulates exactly how fast the technology landscape is changing and the healthcare landscape itself is changing in the United States. I would love to hear your thoughts, Mike. You've been at the forefront leading the technology investments for a large healthcare system. What has been your experience in terms of how health systems, the challenges that health systems face in terms of the evolving needs, and what has been your experience around the ways to be able to manage that effectively?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kishan. And so, I think if you look at these three models, and kind of these eras of healthcare technology in the healthcare space, I think our aspiration has always been to serve our patients or members in the best way possible. But before we could do that, like Kishan mentioned, is we had to implement the EMRs, and those are big, expensive. It's documenting workflows that perhaps were never documented before and put in a digitized fashion. That is the core enabler for anything that we've done since, in the past decade of kind of putting those in place. But it's become very apparent, and like Kishan mentioned, in that middle model is the EMRs are fabulous. They are transactional systems. They are clinically accurate. They are, patient safety first is the motto of it. But with that, from an IT perspective, that architecture becomes a bit brittle. And so we spend a lot of time building out data warehouses. And if you're a mature enterprise of any size, you no doubt have multiple data warehouses, because at least in my experience, as we integrated, perhaps hundreds, or in other cases, maybe thousands of different transactional applications, we had to build a number of data warehouses, and they were very specific to like doing quality reporting, doing claims reporting. In Kaiser Permanente's case, we operated pharmacy and lab, so we had pharmacy and lab systems, and it created, and kind of like that picture shows, a whole network of data warehouses, often that were ingesting the exact same information out of the transactional system, because the core of everything is the EMR. The data elements are the EMR. And so what we ended up with was a quite expensive and fragile environment. So thank goodness along comes kind of the next generation of cloud computing, cloud storage, cloud analytics, and then APIs, of course, application programming interfaces. So now that we can actually spend the time now to re-architect that environment, to remove some of that redundancy and brittleness of that ecosystem. And I'll stop there. But as we see this, kind of next generation into the cloud, it's opened up a lot of that flexibility and optimization and efficiencies.
Makes sense. And kind of, you spoke about your entire life being innovation, at least the professional career part. What's your perspective? So how have you seen the entire healthcare landscape and technology landscape in healthcare change from the time you've been solving problems for our clients in healthcare?
Yeah, I think helping 35 plus big CINs and IDNs in the US. I think the experience I've seen is, every wave you mentioned here was required at that time. Like there was no doubt about that. Did we make the right investments or not? We did, right? But as you see across every other industry, the evolution goes from doing it the right way for your top lines and bottom lines, moving towards having a cohesive information sets for your business to run, which is the warehouse approach and the database approach you were saying in the middle, to moving to an intelligent system wherein your Amazons and your Googles know better about the consumer than the doctors do. The retailers, the bankers know the consumers better than they do, and they know when we need a loan, and they know when we need to buy a car, right? So how does healthcare translate to that now is becoming more and more important. And as we see, the pandemic hit on us, we need flexibility in changing our lines of businesses. We need flexibility in understanding the consumer more, because they are in less touch with us than before. So getting that intelligence, which is more patient-centric, getting the flexibility on the cloud to make sure that we can rearrange lines of businesses, telemedicine going like 20 times more than a primary care visit. You need to change the IT assets along with that. So that new move of flexible models and knowing your patients more, especially when they're being touched less by you, is very important.
Makes sense.
Kishan, I'd just like to emphasize a point Kanav made. And some of it's kind of depressing because it talks about how old I am. But as these tools have built out, I mean, the cloud providers are building fabulous tools for managing data and applications and compute. And And they've been emerging really over the last 5 years. And even though I have 4 decades of experience in this, I've only really done this twice. And Kanav mentioned Innovacer, that the knowledge that you gain, especially with the nuances of healthcare, clinical data, and claims data, has done it over 35 times in much less period than I've spent in the entire industry. So that the importance of knowing how to use those data and compute tools in a clinical context becomes incredibly important in this environment. So I just thought I'd emphasize those points, Kanav made.
Absolutely. And I think what really stood out for me in Kanav's description was that example about how care model has changed overnight since the onset of the pandemic. Like you suddenly had care providers go from being able to see most of their patients in their office, and then like now you suddenly see, hey, there's a lot of need to be able to see patients virtually. So I think that's a great example to actually signify that the only constant in healthcare is the change itself. Moving on, I just want to get a quick sense from our attendees right now. I'm sure each one of you are in a very different phase when it comes to how you're thinking about digital transformation, largely depending on the needs of your organization. We'll do a quick survey here to get a sense from you on where you are in your digital transformation journey. Right? Our team will open the poll shortly. You'll be able to see it on your screen. So we've popularly heard from the conversations we have with our prospective clients on the different phases where they are. So a lot of our clients are in the process of still thinking about how they can move into a single EMR strategy. There are a lot of our clients that are actively thinking about how can they aggregate data, how can they augment their data aggregation abilities, how can they improve their reporting, how can they improve their ability to draw deep analytics from there. We also have a segment of clients that are actively thinking about how they can accelerate innovations within workflows as a part of their digital transformation journey. And we've got a select set of clients that also talk about how patient experience and like creating that is at the center of their digital transformation journey. Would love to hear more from you in terms of where you are. We'll probably take a minute for the survey to go through. And Mike, while you talk about digital transformation in your previous role, what was the key focus of your own digital transformation? Like, was it any one of these 4?
Well, the nice thing it was around certainly managing the patient experience. I think with a lot of, but there's so many positive side benefits. But I think the ultimate goal, and hopefully, in my perspective and what I feel healthcare needs, and is getting the information to the members and the patients. And what's fabulous about that is in order to get that information to them, there's quite a bit of consolidation, as we mentioned, of hundreds, if not thousands, of different applications, and getting them to the point where you don't inundate the member or patient. But the whole goal within medicine is to get people to help manage their own wellness. And so I think definitely as we talk about, as the CMS regulation on the FHIR APIs have come out, those APIs, not only are regulation now, they're a doggone good idea. And the idea that now, instead of application developers, at least the ones I've had in the past, when we wanted to write a new application, say a scheduling service for our members, we had to go forage for all that data and find it. If you've built out these modern day data lakes correctly, that now becomes a data catalog, or even better yet, an API directory for you to search and getting that information. So you're all doing it off the same master data. And so to me, the ultimate goal is that last button. Of course, it's just like the EMR implementation. It's going to take some time.
Right, makes sense. Yeah, I remember the first conversation I had with you. You spoke to me a lot about the patient experience, like things like having the patient come into a care suite and like having the providers go see them instead of the other way around, where you have a provider care suite and things like that, right? So that's
one day in healthcare it will be table stakes, and many of our customers, perhaps a bit on the progressive side, are all thinking that way today. That that digital experience is of equal importance when a person is selecting who their care provider is or who their health plan may be. So just like and there's really no magic there, just following the industry trend and then the expectations of consumers these days. I'll go back to my hospitality days. I mean, I'm not sure the last time I've ever called a travel agent to book the end-to-end vacation experience or travel experience. That was all enabled through the Open Travel Alliance, which was establishing common data definitions and API level interactions.
Makes sense. Okay, I'm just trying to get the results. Having some trouble pulling it up. Okay, we'll just probably come back to that in a minute. So Mike.
It's showing now, Kishan.
You're able to see these. It's only me that's having trouble. Mike, would you be kind enough to just share what the results look like?
Yeah, so our respondents picked at number 1 at 71%, augmenting data aggregation, reporting, and analytics was by far the big winner. Mm-hmm. Tied for second place was moving towards a single EMR strategy and accelerating workflow innovations. It's tied for second at 14% each. And then 0% for the patient experience. So I might have been wrong in at least my perception of where I think a lot of the future healthcare is going. But This is kind of where people are today, which I guess I'm not too surprised, because you can't get to that patient experience until you've done, the bullet number 2 of doing the aggregating of the data. It would be my explanation of that.
Yeah. And I'm also assuming that most people pick the dominant theme, so that might be the other reason why we see that response. Yeah. But moving on. So, Mike, when you think about digital transformation, what is your primer for a CIO? How should CIO or a CTO, how should they think about digital transformation, especially making it especially in the context where they operate with different constraints, and how do they balance all of that and actively think through a strategy that is actually winning for them in their context?
Yeah, and so I'll just start, and I think we have a slide on this too, is that, I think in the context of the CIO, or the chief digital officer, whoever, or, the chief customer officer, is Kanav's role in our organization, is what does that strategy look like? And I think fortunately, with the way the technologies are today, if you're clever on how you lay this out, you being the organization, can be clever around funding a lot of these new things, because a new digital experience sounds really fancy, sounds horribly expensive, but actually, as you move to some of these newer technologies, and in particular the cloud, you can do some self-funding of these capabilities. And so I think it's really important that you kind of do those steps. And so step 1 is getting the ability to virtualize and move at a quicker rate than many kind of legacy IT departments can move. But the good news about that is that helped fund some of the development to getting the data organized to then kind of get to the point where you can start thrilling your member or your patients. So I'll just stop right there for a moment.
Makes sense. And but Mike, when you talk about potentially funding a lot of your innovations just through newer technologies, I still assume that there is a phase lag, or are you indicating that you could possibly be thriftier about how you do this in a way that you actually realize the savings before you start investing in newer technologies?
Well, now you're breaking the secret, Kish. And truth be told, is generally to do some of these does require some upfront investment. So, but I look at it similarly the way venture capitalists look at things is, I'll give you some seed money to prove it out and get started, because there's a lot of, if you talk to folks, it's not overwhelmingly a consensus that the cloud saves money. That's not my point of view, quite frankly, but it's at the very least neutral. But to me, the savings you get by, depending on how you're managing your current physical environment, if your utilization is low, you're going to get greater utilization and therefore greater return on your assets. And then secondly, and probably the biggest surprise that I saw in implementing now cloud in 2 large organizations is the savings in development time. It used to, in the olden days, physical servers took months to provision. Months compared to minutes now in the cloud-based world saves your developers times. And then the other one, and this is kind of a funny joke, and this happened, I won't say which organization, but it's happened at 2 of the organizations I've worked for. And these were in my groups. I had departments full of contractors that they were called system expediters, but all they really did was bug the system administrator who was trying to get the work done, but they were continually getting bugged, say, is it configured yet? Is it configured yet? Is it configured yet? And that was a non-insignificant amount of some of the savings that we saw in implementing the cloud. So that's kind of your bullet number 2, though, about migrating for flexibility and efficiency.
But you're also saying that there's a big element of efficiency. That's how you think about cloud. Makes sense. Okay. And kind of what's your take on this? I know you've been actually in the midst of driving digital transformation for a couple of our clients right now. How do you think about it? Like, how should CIOs of large health systems and organizations in general think about digital transformation?
Right. I think all of these points hold almost equal, if not less, value in this digital transformation. But I think the way to think that systematically is, think about phasing it out and doing it in a way that, as Mike said, fund yourself, right? So if you keep on, if you go to your CFO and say, I want a $100 million check for digital transformation, they're gonna laugh at you and take it away. But if you say, give me 20 million to start with, which will be cost neutral at best, if nothing else, and then go forward, right? That makes sense. That aligns a lot of teams within that. I think that's the first step, right? The second step is to make sure what are you have to be true to yourself on what are you replacing with cloud versus keeping to yourself. What I mean by that is it's all about managed service. You are managing products or DevOps or the ETL jobs or some application components of SaaS. Like, what are you keeping honest to yourself versus to a cloud or a SaaS vendor, right? That helps you clarify where the budgets go. I think the other important thing is that identifying the redundancies. You might be having, as Mike told me once, the data is flowing data has at least 10 copies somewhere in your warehouses, right? And you have tons of applications which are doing the same job primarily, but bought during different times of M&As and whatnot that you had your organization go with. So while you're doing this migration, you also can reduce some redundancies at the same time to get the money back for these programs. So I think these are the 3 things that I would say on top of these 7 bullets are really important.
Makes sense.
I'll just add to that redundancy thing. Not only is it inefficient, maybe some organizations don't have that kind of data redundancy and duplication. I'm quite frankly would be surprised if that were the case. But the other thing that we often talk about in moving to these cloud environments is that redundancy is a large threat surface, because in general those are like ASCII type files, perhaps encrypted, most likely not, perhaps password protected, half the time not. And so it is a real threat surface, for the very reason that it exists. People are trying to get access to data, yet they're doing it in a very uncontrolled and insecure manner. And so that's kind of that democratized access, is that once you get this data managed, reduced, now you can control it and give access to the data who need it in a safe fashion. I've been through, as you might imagine, the CIA is pretty particular about their data security. Been through thousands of security audits and red team reviews, and time after time, this is probably one of the biggest risk areas that needs better management in any corporation, in my opinion.
Let me give an anecdote on the redundancy. As Mike was saying, I was remembering this amazing dialogue I had. So I met this CFO in a conference in San Francisco, and she just came out of a workshop where someone was talking about some efficiency numbers that a CFO should track, and she was like, "Oh, this is a good efficiency number." So during the workshop, she pinged her team to get those numbers for her CIN or was IDN, and she got 3 different numbers from 3 different team members because they were using 3 different systems on the same efficiency. And she was like, I am spending twice the money to get this number, and I don't know which one to trust, right? So redundancy also costs a lot of friction and frustration with executives on how can they drive their business. So it's very important to have one good numbers that you can trust and one system that you can trust.
Makes sense. Okay. Then moving on. So when we think about digital transformation, like what I've been always hearing from CIOs in my conversation is that the first thing they think about always is, hey, what is the ultimate goal? So where do they see themselves, and like that kind of sets the tone, for building out the strategy and actually eventually their execution path as well. So when you look at defining the future, what is like I remember this article in Wall Street Journal that I read about 5 years ago. They did an attempt at trying to ask 10 leaders from different healthcare organizations in the United States, asking them to imagine what the future of healthcare is going to look like. And what was very interesting there was that everybody spoke about doing simple things right. People talked about how can you use medical devices, sensors, etc., to be able to identify when a senior citizen is probably going to need some care and actively intervening at the point where he needs most care. Not a lot of examples came up around doing more complex things or building more complicated procedures and things like that. So Mike, how do you think about future? Like when you're embarking on a roadmap process to create a digital transformation roadmap for your organization, what's your guiding principle in terms of thinking about the future?
So I think it's leveraging one of the points you said. It is about creating simplicity and action out of data. Like for example, you talk to most of the the high-tech providers now, kind of the technology-led places like down in the Valley and in Seattle and in all the major hubs. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and all of those goals is letting the computer do some thinking, managing that complexity for the physician or a caregiver or a member or patient themselves. So I think that is kind of what paints the picture. But in order to do that, and we'll be a little redundant here, but you do have to back up, because the issue to date, as in Kanav's example with the CFO, is you can't trust the data. And until you get to the point where the data has been integrated and unified to be all that information around a patient, because our healthcare systems are fragmented, and even myself, I have a number of different people. I have a dentist, I have a primary care physician. They don't talk to each other, yet those are interactions that could have some value in some of these AI routines that are going to evolve. And so I think you kind of go to where everybody wants to go, and we're all talking about, and in my experience, everyone is talking about. It's just we've got to get those stepping stones to get there, and that's the misunderstood part. And I think certainly our point of view is we've got to get that data organized in order to simplify, the complexity of the healthcare system to the members and patients.
Got it. Makes sense. Moving on, when we think about like the digital transformation, you both spoke about the importance of cloud. But why is cloud so important? Why is this entire process of driving digital transformation on-prem not as popular as the cloud itself?
Oh, Mike, do you want to go first?
You want me to, so to me, I'll do the simple answer is we ought to get the technologists out of the business of managing and configuring servers and racking things and wiring them, and get them into the higher order business like we talked about, and have them building the applications, building the home device monitoring things. There is no ROI for healthcare delivery in configuring a server or defragging a database. I'll just stop right there because I really think it's that almost that direct. And Kanab, of course, we'll have more on that.
No, I'm on the same page with you. The only thing I'd add to that is flexibility. Like let's assume you had telemedicine on premise 1 year back, and as COVID here, you have to now get a scale of 20 times that. Now you are in a business of purchasing, machines to support it, and it's a long process. But your providers want it tomorrow. Like, how do you sell that flexibility? You can't do it on premise. It's so tough. You have to do it on the cloud, right? So, you don't want your technologists to be working on the commodity stuff, which is, the hardware and the network and the services. They need to be working on the stuff that's useful for business. How can we go towards more intelligence? How do we democratize the data? How do we work on workflow innovations? I think all those are something, like as you can see on the slide. I mean, this is a traditional, on-prem to SaaS evolution, right? But if you see, the green buttons are things that are managed by you as a health system, while the yellow ones are managed by your vendors, be it cloud or SaaS vendors, right? And as you move from left to right, you just start to see that, hey, everything is managed by SaaS vendor, and now you can work on the amazing stuff, which is the workflow innovation, predictive models, the intelligence being democratized across the board, and working on a modern workplace. Like that's what you need to work on. Now the question, as Mike was saying, is, okay, if the vendors are doing the yellow stuff, is it more costly? Not all the times. I mean, if you equate your human resources managing the yellow stuff versus the additional cost that cloud has, and sometimes your on-premise servers, as Mike might allude to, are not utilized the most efficient way as well. So the cost kind of goes neutral by itself at worst case scenario, and you start to save money for sure.
Makes sense.
And I'll just kind of add to that. If you think of the analytic community, and in the on-premise world, let's say you need 10 servers to meet a certain analytic need, and you're paying for those 10 servers. You paid for them. You're paying license fee. You're paying for maintenance. You pay for your people to maintain them. Well, the analysts go home. They're very hard-working people. So let's say they're working 12 hours a day. That still means there's 12 hours a day where those servers are sitting idle. In a cloud environment, those environments get quiesced, the data is saved, and that's a fairly low cost. But you don't pay for that compute that you're not using. And I think that gets multiplied hundreds and hundreds of times. As you move into these kind of more flexible cloud-hosted environments. And the other thing, and like this slide shows, is that the cloud providers have done a fabulous job. I've been around so long. I remember we had to build our own graphics processors in the early days. I mean, this has just been the legacy of compute. It's moved up that stack, and there's more and more logical-based services now, like master data management. DBM. I mean, as basic as DBMS is, in the early days that didn't exist either. So as we keep going up that stack, and you only pay for what you need, I think there's big efficiencies that you capture. And like I said, the host of these cloud hosting environments are just, every day I turn around, there's a new service that's being hosted in the cloud that we can take advantage of, like machine visioning, these AI tools that we talk about. So to me, it's a massive curve that we can just piggyback on and follow.
Makes sense. So there's an element of cost, there's an element of flexibility, like Kanav spoke about, and you're also talking about the ecosystem, like in terms of your ability to augment some of the initiatives that you're already driving by using some services that's publicly available as well. Makes sense. Kanav, were you saying something? Did I?
No, I was just saying that, to our earlier conversation we had like a few minutes back, don't go with a $100 million budget ask, go step by step. What I've seen in the market is this three-phase approach works really well, where phase one, you just move your lowerware and the middleware and the ETLs to cloud, and you kind of save money on the management piece of the human resource, while you might be going a bit spike on the OpEx on cloud, and that becomes cost neutral, sometimes saves money as well within phase one. And now that you have proven that, go to the phase two, where you want to even move your the whole data unification and applications to the cloud. And while you do that, you can make your applications redundancy go south, wherein if you have 5 applications for risk adjustment, and then 10 applications for care management, and 6 applications for patient engagement, all of them can start to reduce now, and you can save more money there. And the money you save there, you can fund your own initiatives on workflow innovations and predictive models and intelligence, which the business truly needs from you. So if you do it in a phased approach, you create your own budgets over time.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Okay, so then moving on, one of the key responses that we got to our earlier survey was that most people are in the process of doing more in terms of their aggregating and like reporting and analytical capabilities. So kind of when you created Innovaser, like when you conceptualized Innovaser, your entire business model and the idea was focused around how you can help providers aggregate data into a single unified data model. Can you speak to us a little more about why is a unified data model important, and what are the key challenges that you encounter as you try putting together data into a single data model?
No, absolutely. I think one thing we learned pretty fast, and I think that was a big bet we took, which turned out to be good, is that the more investments you make upfront in unifying the data, the better returns it has every year for you. The usual mistake people do in healthcare is they just unify the data for just the use case they want today. But if you don't unify the data in a holistic way, your use case development and innovation and speed in that goes pretty slow. So you're not helping the business; you're helping yourself in being a bit slacky on, or being more efficient on your projects. But if you unify the data up front, and I keep on hearing these terms in the industry. People are like, hey, let's do FHIR, let's do HL7, let's do CCDA, let's do X12, and all those standards. These are great communication standards. You need to define your own compute and storage standard, because there's no standard built in healthcare for compute and storage. It's built for communications between different systems, right? And when you come to that, you start to realize, hey, your storage, your compute, your transaction, and your BI models have to be different. There's no one size fit all. So we learned over time that this staging you see from level 0 to 5 of this data staging is primarily serving different parts of your facets. Like your level 2 is serving the transaction layer, with level 4 serving the messaging layer, level 3 serving the compute, and level 5 serving the dashboard layers, right? So you have to have different layers of data within your strategy to make sure that each one of them is serving different use cases. Because if someone says, yes, I have a magic OLAP and OLTP database in one shot, they're lying to themselves. You can't do that. So having a unified data upfront and investing in that and staging your data for different use cases is like the utmost important thing that you should do. And it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the unique approaches here, is that Kanav in coming up with his architecture spent as much time concerned about how to use the data, and using our word of activate that data for all the different use cases was not normal. I mean, generally people get so obsessed with let's get the data to the cloud, Well, that's really not the problem you're trying to solve. The problem you're trying to solve is getting the right information at the right level at the speeds that are required to do an effective activation of the different user groups. And I think we all know that a data scientist, heavy duty compute need is different than an application developer that wants some APIs, that wants lightning fast response time. So it's you have to take approach similar, in our opinion, this structured model of curated data.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about like digital transformation as a broad concept. We've talked about the importance of cloud. We've talked about the key things to keep in mind when we aggregate data into a unified data model. Now, all of this has to lead to outcomes, right? So we've talked about the savings that you could generate by just doing the migration in a meaningful way. We've talked about the flexibility component around that, but kind of you briefly also talked about being able to realize the third wave of savings, which comes more from innovating on workflows. How do workflow innovations really save dollars for health systems, or rather, is there a quantifiable way to actually think about savings from things like workflow innovations as well, as organizations embark on a digital transformation journey?
Well, this definitely is. I mean, everything has a method to the madness, right? Uh, the method to the madness that I have found useful is, think about the value drivers you have in an organization, and for each value driver, how do you innovate the workflow? I have sat into so many sessions on, okay, what's your value driver? Are you trying to, improve surgical outcomes as you see on the slide, or are you trying to, reduce readmissions? Are you trying to improve your network, integrity? Are you trying to improve your pricing integrity? What are you trying to improve, right? And then when you enter into the workflow, it is so many handoffs in that workflow, and between each handoff, the data gets lost. I mean, all the stakeholders in that workflow are not on the same page, do not have the same data to play with or to take decisions on. So every workflow can be optimized and improved in healthcare. That's where we have a $1.3 trillion wastage of the 3.6 more, right? So the way to look at it is define your value drivers, and for each one of them, map out your workflow, reduce the number of handoffs, and provide all stakeholders the same data that they can take decision on. And then you will start to see, and then you can mature it over time with more predictive algorithms to help them go better, right? But as you see on this one, right, I mean, there is a specialist, a care coordinator, a patient, a PCP involved in improving surgical outcomes. Are those all four people on the same page? And do they know what they have to do at that time? And are all the applications they're using getting fed with that data? And if that is the case, then you have solved a few things for them already. Right?
Makes sense. And kind of when you're doing these value focused discussions and like how you can derive true dollars out of workflow innovations, what do you usually see? What is the lead time to be able to realize savings or actual revenue gains through workflow innovations?
Yeah, it doesn't take more than 4 to 6 months, I would say, to start seeing value. Mm-hmm. But the beauty is where most organizations fall off track is they pick up 20 workflow innovation projects compared to 4, right? Mm-hmm. And sure, you make $2 on $1 spend in this workflow, but you can still make 4 on 1 or 5 on 1. Like, how do you get there? So the advice I give to my customers is every quarter reevaluate how much dollars have you made on how much dollars you have spent in this workflow, and can you bump it up with some diagnostics? And as you go better in that over time, you are making more money with less investments, because it's always, you know, the next optimization does not cost so much on the human resources side and the technology side. But B, you are being more competitive compared to your peers, and healthcare is becoming more competitive. I mean, all the payments are becoming more relative and in a zero-sum game. So you have to be competitive. You have to be better than your next door, neighbors on what you're doing.
Got it. So you're saying it's really a continuous improvement journey, and like the extent to which you could actually realize savings or additional dollar value is practically unlimited. You can just keep drawing better insights and tweak your workflows and like generate more value. Is that how you look at things?
Yeah, I mean, after a while, you will hit the law of marginal returns. I'm not saying that it's infinite or it's completely elastic, but most organizations, drop the ball after the first, optimization cycles. So they
Got
should
it.
continue to at least 2 or 3 more cycles on that.
Makes sense. Okay, so that's very insightful. We've got some very interesting questions from audience, so I'm going to take one of those before we move into the next segment. Mike, I think this question is probably for you. Uh, One of our attendees asks, what are the concerns you guys have seen from CIOs in healthcare who have legacy on-prem environments? Safety, CapEx to OpEx, change management concerns with lift and shift and things like that. They also ask about questions around what's your experience on data mobility and security concerns when you do a migration to cloud. Are these valid concerns, or are they more myths against cloud adoption?
Yeah, there were a couple questions in there. So I'll kind of go with the first one. And I would say, the change management was a big thing. I'll tell you what my experience was, well, both at, the CIA and Kaiser Permanente is, you need to ease into these things. For example, I recommend, taking some of, as you start experimenting with the cloud, is taking some of those things, like the analytic environment is a little more forgiving than the transactional environment. So we have, and I have chosen in both cases where I've moved to the cloud, is to take those analytic workloads, maybe even just archiving, but start easy with it, because you've got to get the security people satisfied with it. You've got to solve the myth of that it's more expensive, which to me isn't true. But start with some of those easier use cases and get some folks experienced in kind of doing that. In both cases where I worked, the application side is by far the most complex. And so in both cases, what we started doing was refactoring our applications to be cloud compatible. And whether you pick Cloud Foundry or some SOA-based architecture or microservices, it doesn't matter as much, but you want to be able to prepare the applications for their eventual hosting in a public type cloud environment. So we did one, we built an on-premise cloud using, in some of the earlier days, we virtualized our current environment. So we got experience with virtualization of the server. We refactor our applications to operate now in a more dynamic environment. We didn't have all the features, but we had a lot of them. Got people experienced it with that. Moved the analytic workspace into the cloud, and then slowly started moving. And now that I've kind of refactored my app to be services based, I moved those slowly into the cloud, because the transactional world is the make or break world, because you can't, there is no forgiveness, especially on EMRs and those types of things, which I haven't gone there yet, but be slow on that. And then there are going to be some legacy environments that you may not want to move, may not make sense to move, maybe too dangerous to move, maybe so old you wouldn't know how to move it. And in those cases, it's the classic, put a front layer on it that's accessible to those services. And then what I have found is some of those big legacy environments, you can start chipping away functionally at those capabilities, because odds are that they exist in the cloud. And so to me, there's 3 or 4 moving parts there that have to happen, but it is getting your IT department prepared and moving that way. And then probably one of the biggest learnings we have, the concept about data movement, data gravity is going to be a big factor. As you know, it costs money to egress off a cloud. You can put it in for nothing. There's a lot of incentives to get data into the cloud, but moving them around, we had one particular instance where we had 100, this was an external cloud, we had 110 external interfaces to that cloud, and that data was bouncing between that ERP cloud and our on-premise environment. And we, not only was it we were sucking up the internet, but we were spent a lot of money on ingress and egress to get all that data consolidated in one place. So you do have to think about your cloud data gravity. And then I don't know if this is right or wrong, but my propensity has been, to kind of start with one cloud before you try to do this massive hybrid approach, because there is some complexity about moving that data around. And there are some developments happening in this space in the technology market on managing that heterogeneity amongst hybrid cloud big data environments. But they're, in my opinion, still a bit not ready for production in an IT space. So that was a long-winded answer. I think there were a couple questions in there. I think I hit most of them.
Absolutely. No, I think so. You're essentially saying that moving to cloud is not straightforward. It's tricky. You want to make sure that you have all your bases covered, and starting small and going big is the best way to go about it. But it's definitely not true to say that cloud is less secure. You obviously have enough mechanisms to make it as secure as your on-prem infrastructure, if not more, right?
Yeah, I think on the
argue.
security,
Go ahead.
on just the security, I would like to add, I mean, Mike put great points about moving the analytical workloads before the transactional ones. That's the winning strategy. I think on the security side, I would say, if there are vulnerabilities in your code, be it on-premise or cloud, doesn't matter. What we are comparing cloud and on-premise on security is the firewalls and the guardrails we have put in the infrastructure, right? And you need to do a thorough security review with the cloud vendor for sure. But I tell my people all the time, how many security engineers we have? 5, probably 10. How many security engineers cloud vendors have? Thousands, right? So they have thought more about security, and their business is lying on the foundation that they're secure. And if they're not, they will be out of business tomorrow. So they provide more guardrails than we can think of on security. We just need to exercise them. We need to use them. We need to know what they are, and we need to have a clear communication with the security teams around that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Moving on, we just want to do another quick survey with our participants. Kind of just spoke about realizing value from workflow innovations. We'd love to know a little bit about your perspective. So where do you see most realizable value in your organization's context? Do you think growing patient volumes is one of those areas? Is reducing cost of care the key focus area? Or are things like reducing length of stay, readmission rates, the areas where you think you're going to have most return on your investments? Or could it be something just as simple as being able to provide more data-driven decision-making ability for your administrators? We'll have a few minutes for you to take this answer. And while our audience take that question, kind of one last question for you. How do you go about working with our clients during this pandemic? You did mention about the kind of change that our clients and providers around the country are experiencing during the pandemic. There is obviously a lot of change in the way they are caring for their patients. There's a lot of change in the way they are thinking about the budgets. A lot of hospitals are under financial strains. So during this phase, how have you been actively helping our clients cope with these external factors, in addition to being able to make sure that you're keeping their digital transformation path on track? And also, how are you engaging with with new clients that are interested to work with you on their cloud transformation journey?
Yeah, I think see, the easiest way and the most required step is to do a diagnostic and analysis on knowing the lay of land of what you have today. I mean, the first thing before you want to move to cloud is, you know, with one of our customers, the first thing we did is, okay, if you want to move this warehouse to cloud, how many input feeds does it have? How many outbound feeds does it have? How many reporting structures you have put on top of it, right? Like if you don't know the ins and the outs and the things on top of it, you won't be able to replace them or lift and shift them easily, right? And while you do that discovery, you also figure out some areas of redundancy, reduction. Like can I replace these 3 reporting layers with one? Why did we choose these 3? There might be something in the past during M&A or whatnot that might have happened. It's a good time to clean it up, right? Come up with that whole process and then phase it out. And the phasing out is very dependent on customer to customer or organization to organization. There's no one size fit all answer to that. Some are really stressed on this pandemic environment on a few cases on like real-time reporting on their supplies and inventory and human resources. Some are focused on telemedicine, some are focused on virtual care, and they want to do that first before taking this big step. So the phase-wise approach will be very dependent on the goals that the organizations have. But I would recommend to make sure that the first phase, the phase 1 of a digital transformation, should complete within one budget cycle, within one annual budget cycle, because I think one question was raised about capex and opex, right? Yes, there is some change, not a lot, but I mean, human resource is opex in on-prem that goes to opex in licensing in cloud. But there is still some change in capex and opex models, and you need to make sure your phase 1 doesn't exceed one annual budget cycle. Otherwise, you will have a hard time to convince your CFOs on how you getting your budgets aligned.
Makes sense. Great. We'll just view the poll results. Kanav, are you able to see the poll results on your screen?
Yeah, I think the winner is improving data-driven decision making with a 50%, reducing cost of care 33%, and reducing length of stay, readmissions, etc. at 17%.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So we're almost at the top of the hour right now. Kanav, Mike, thank you for being a part of this webinar and sharing all these great insights. It's been lovely hosting you on this webinar. And to our audience, thank you so much for being such a great audience. We've received a lot of questions that we could not cover during the webinar, but we'll be sure to make sure that we send you personalized response to all the questions that have come our way. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks for hosting, Kishan.